What's up, skeptics? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical. I'm Jordan, joined with Jared. And again, this is like the fourth or fifth time in a row we just suddenly became super popular with everybody. We have a special guest, Trolley Dave from sunny the British Isles, you in Wales, I think.
Wales, yeah,
sunny Wales. So how's it going, Dave?
Not too bad, thanks. It's I'm a little half asleep here at the moment, but it's been pretty good.
Yeah, well, that's what you get for living in the wrong time zone. If you lived in America like you're supposed to.
If I lived in the past like you guys do.
Right. Well, unfortunately, though, you have no choice in where you live because you have no choices at all. Because free will is an illusion and everything was decided back at the beginning of time.
This was decided at the Big Bang.
Exactly. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Do we have free will? If we do, in what sense do we have free will? And what are the implications of that? Is this something that is exclusive? Like, is it a settled question among theists at least? What are the implications for atheism? We'll be covering all those sorts of things. This was a suggested topic in the comments. So if you have a topic that you'd like to hear us talk about and get somebody extremely intelligent and articulate on, or Dave, then you...
Yeah, that's okay. Put me in that.
Then drop it in the comments and let us know. So, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for people who aren't familiar with your channel and what you do?
I'm Dave, and as you just heard, I live in Wales in the UK. I run a channel where I discuss philosophy and films and have like little logic lessons and stuff like that. At the moment, I'm doing a computer degree. I'm on my third degree now, pretending to be intelligent, you know. Not doing very well at it, but...
Well, if you just keep getting more degrees, you never have to leave college, and, you know.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to have an actual job, but...
Yeah, well, you know, they're overrated.
Yeah, who needs money?
Strongly recommend Dave's channel. It's very well presented and concise and even-handed, so the link will be in the description, so go check out his stuff. So... free will. Why don't we start with what is it? What is free will when we talk about it? What does it mean?
Usually, it's the idea that we're in charge of our own choices. That's the most common idea, the Libertarian Free Will idea. It's the idea that there's a ghost in the machine, or ghost in the shell, as they like to say. And that's rather than our brains controlling what we do, we control our brains. So you need a kind of soul for that, I guess. Hence why religion kind of can cover this, but atheists can also follow this sort of free will. If you think of something like substance dualism, you don't necessarily need to be a theist to be a substance dualist, but the idea is that if you were to rewind time, you could go back and, you know, make a different decision. Whereas under determinism, everything is kind of determined by your psychology, by your history, by what's in front of you, and then your brain makes the choice for you, and you're just dragged along with it. And those are the two, sort of determined and indeterminate.
So libertarian free will is kind of like the free will everyone thinks they have. It's kind of like...
Yeah, it's most people have that kind of intuition that they're in control. Or at least they seem to. There's people that don't have that intuition, like Pologia says he doesn't have it. And if you've ever heard of Lance Guest, he's a big YouTuber that discusses morality. He says he doesn't have the intuition that he has free will. But I think most people actually do feel like they have free will and they're in control of what they choose.
I like Christopher Hitchens' way of putting it. He says, of course I believe I have free will. I have no choice.
I've got no choice, yeah.
Yeah. And so the determinism side is kind of pushing against that because that's the story we get from a study of physics, or at least some ideas of physics, that the world follows natural laws that kind of proceed from the past. If you know the past, you can predict the future. If hypothetically you knew perfectly the past, you could predict the future with perfect or near perfect fidelity. There's some like quantum uncertainty, but that's not really relevant to the free will idea. And so the question, like you said, is if the universe is deterministic, so that it's, we're just marbles running through a maze, then how could there be anywhere for us to latch on to change things?
Yeah, neuroscience seems to think that there is no actual place in the brain for free will. This is something that, do you know Robert Sapolsky?
No.
You're using big names right now, Trolley.
Yeah, just name dropping left and right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll go back to being dumb again. He's kind of quite big at the moment because he's released a book called Determined, and he's discussing free will, and he argues basically that everything is determined and there is no space in our brains for free will. And that's generally Sam Harris as well. He argues something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's based on, have you heard of the Libet experiments?
Why don't you, I know what they are. Why don't you tell the audience so they know?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's basically back in I think it was the early 80s. Libet did some experiments where he had some people and they would be given I think it was a rotating disc, and they would be told to push a button. And when they feel the urge to push the button, or when they decide to push the button, they make a note of where the rotation is on the dial. And they basically scanned the brain at the same time, and it showed that there was 300 milliseconds brain activity before actually pushing the button. And that is the thought is that is the brain making the choice to push the button. Libet called it the readiness potential, but somebody like Sapolsky or Harris argues that no, that's the actual brain determining to push the button.
And the idea behind that was that the brain was determining this before you even were aware that you were going to make that decision.
Yeah, before you became conscious of the idea that you're going to push the button.
Right.
And so if your brain is making decisions without your conscious self being involved, then that would seem to argue against having free will, which seems distinct from everyone knows that you have unconscious thoughts, or your brain can be kind of working on something when you're not really thinking about it. But that seems like the brain could be if we had a libertarian free will, could almost be a assistant, just plugging along on problems and then handing the conscious self, here's the answer, self,
do you want to do something? Yeah. Right. And I think that's how a lot of people do actually see free will, in that the unconscious passes it to you and you decide yes or no. And Libet kind of argued that these experiments didn't show that there was no free will. In fact, what we have is something called free won't, which is kind of a clever expression, but it's the thoughts come into our conscious brains and we have the ability to override those choices and make a new choice. Say type 1, type 2 thinking, I guess. Type 1 being the more intuitive thinking, type 2 being the more sort of contemplated thinking that comes into the mind.
So it seems like, at least, that there's a lot of weight behind the deterministic idea. Basically, the universe seems to be deterministic. And it seems like the principal thing behind libertarian free will is, but I feel like I have free will. My immediate perceived experience is that of having free will, which isn't nothing. There's value in our immediate experience, and so we shouldn't dismiss it without
well, intuitions can count for reasons for believing a particular thing. They're usually called seemings. So, a philosopher called Michael Huemer basically refers to them as intellectual seemings. So if we have the idea that something is a particular way based on our intuitions, we have reason to believe it unless presented with good defeaters.
Right. So is there a middle ground between these two? If, say, I'm a good materialist, so I think we live in a deterministic universe, but I really would like to have free will anyway. What are my options?
You can be a self-determinist, or you can kind of be an indeterminist in the sense that the universe is indeterminate. So at the quantum level, there are random events that happen. But then you're not really saving free will in that case, because it's just a random event. You're still not making a choice. If you rewound the universe and it picked a different random thing, then you still haven't made the choice and rescued free will.
I didn't pick it. The universe picked it.
The universe did, yeah. There's also soft determinism, or what most people refer to as compatibilism, which is the idea that free will and determinism are compatible. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that what they mean when they say free will and determinism are compatible is that it's libertarian free will, but it's not. It's the idea that we can still speak about free will in a meaningful way, and in a way that kind of rescues justice, morality, desert, and things like that.
Right. And so when we're thinking about this, I mean, there seems to be some implications for whatever way that you would do this. So if you end up being a hard determinist, that changes your outlook on how you live in the world. And if you think that you are completely, on the I have no, or you have free will 100%, that's going to change the way that you live in the world. I'm sure philosophy has something to say about that. I mean, why are we not all just nihilists, basically?
Yeah.
I mean, well, Christians tell me I should be a nihilist all the time. So,
technically speaking, if you're an atheist, you should start from a position of nihilism and then build on that into something like existentialism. Yeah. Because if atheism is true, there are no inherent values in the universe, right, which is where existentialism rescues it and says, we're free to create our own values and whatnot. But there are psychological experiments, which are kind of interesting in that they prime people, which is also a pretty good example that there is no free will. But they prime people to think about what it would mean to have no free will. And then they ask them questions, and the people generally tend to be slightly more nihilistic after performing these experiments. So knowing there is no free will can actually affect how we make our way through the world, which is another argument that, free will is something we ought to believe in.
If you could elucidate a little bit more on compatibilism, because I've read Dan Dennett's book. He's one of the better known philosophers, at least better known to me,
my favorite,
that articulates it. And I've read his book on it twice, and I'm still not sure I understand. So, of the three, if I had put a gun to my head and I had to choose, even I don't think I have libertarian free will, I'd probably say compatibilist. But to be perfectly honest, my wife asked me last night, oh, what's compatibilism? And I had a hard time explaining it.
I think a lot of people do. Like I say, a lot of people hear free will and determinism being compatible, and their first thought is free will in a libertarian sense. But what it actually means is that we still have free will in the sense that if we are running based on our desires, and our desires are, making our choices, then as long as our desires and our will isn't being impeded by outside forces, it's still our choice. So if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, go rob the bank or kill your family, that seems to be a slightly different sense of will or desire than just waking up in the morning and going, I'm going to go rob a bank. There seems to be a meaningful difference between those two uses of the will. So there is still this sort of meaningful aspect where there seems to be differences between what we desire and being free to act on those desires, and, say, a tumor in the brain. Like the idea that somebody gets a tumor and it completely changes their personality. Then the tumor is removed and they go back to being who they are. It seems that their will has been impeded by an outside agent. So compatibilism is the idea that we can still speak about free will in this sense, and that rescues ideas about morality and justice and desert.
So would it be fair to say that myself in a deterministic universe is some bundle of experiences and desires and whatever other factors go into my decision making. And the things that led to that could all be deterministic. Like it could have been fated from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And yet, because I am deterministically acting on this set of desires, all the things that I call myself, then I am still free, even if a perfect, like Laplace's demon could have predicted with fidelity what I was going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's, at least as far as I understand it, it's still you. Because if what is you is simply, like you say, this bundle of desires in a sort of Humean bundle theory of self, then you're still making those decisions. It's not like having somebody put a gun to your head and say, go do this. That wouldn't be your will being acted on. That would be somebody else's. So it's a different kind of will.
But it's still deterministic in the sense that
still deterministic.
You couldn't rewind time and make a different decision.
Well,
yeah, under determinism, if you rewound time, you would end up making the same decision.
But Dennett tries to address that by talking about the sense in which we mean I could have done it differently. So the example he gives is like if you were playing golf and you made a shot and you missed. And you're like, oh, man, I could have made that shot. You don't mean if the universe was exactly the same down to the exact atom that I would have made it. No, nobody means that. What they mean is in broadly similar circumstances, but not similar in every particular, I could have done differently.
You could have done different, yeah.
Right. And so in the same way, while if you rewound a deterministic universe down to the exact atom, I would do the same thing. That's not really what we mean when we say I could have done differently. We mean is in a kind of vaguely similar situation, I could have done a different thing. And that is still true in a deterministic universe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why you hear a current argument. Have you ever heard of the Kantian idea, ought implies can?
Yes, but elucidate it for the audience.
Sorry, I keep doing that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I know that we're handsome and intelligent fellows, and everyone who watches this is also handsome, but may not be intelligent. I don't know.
I'm in their club then, you know. But yeah, it's the idea that if you ought to do something, you must be able to do it. And so in a deterministic universe, to say something like, oh, you ought to have done differently, if it's deterministic, then you can't do differently. But there's a couple of senses of ought that are in play here. Like you said, it doesn't mean rewinding time and being in the exact same thing. There's like a general sense of ought. There's an immediate sense of ought. So you ought to have done differently doesn't necessarily mean you ought to have done it in that moment, but you ought not to have killed the old lady for her pack of bubblegum. Sure, you might have been determined to do that, but that still doesn't mean you ought not to have done it in a more general sense, if that makes any sense.
In a universe that looked mostly like the one we're in, but isn't exactly the same one that we're in, it was within your power, at least you could have done a different thing, not killing that lady, as opposed to saying you ought to jump over a skyscraper. There's no permutation in the universe where I can jump over a skyscraper. So exactly. At least none that are like in any way resemble ours. And
yeah, exactly. We don't live in some modality that allows us to break gravity. So, right. Yeah. And because we are determined based on our psychology, it does mean that we can learn to do differently. I think determinism speaks well for things like rehabilitation when it comes to justice, because if you think about libertarian free will, that argues that people are evil. They're just born bad. So it's harder to think of the idea of rehabilitation in libertarian free will. But in deterministic universe, if everybody is just a result of their psychology and their experiences, people can be rehabilitated much easier.
Change the experiences, change the psychology, change
Yeah.
So that's touching on morality and the idea that even in a deterministic universe, if you accept compatibilism, at least, you are still responsible for your actions.
Yeah.
If suppose though, and obviously, if you have libertarian free will, where you are freely choosing to do things, then clearly you're responsible for your actions because you chose to do it, right? What about that third option? Let's say you think compatibilism is nonsense, but you don't think you have libertarian free will. We just live in a deterministic universe, and I'm an automaton. In that sense, it would seem like in some way you aren't really responsible for your actions because,
you had no choice. Yeah. It's not. In morality, one of the big ideas is that moral responsibility implies that you chose those particular actions and you could have chosen differently. And there needs to be this sense of self that gives you that moral responsibility. So in a deterministic universe, the idea would be that you didn't make that choice. You had no choice but to do it. If you had no choice but to do it, you're not responsible for it. And many people find this kind of harsh, I guess. It sounds kind of good in some ways because, like, bad kids aren't really responsible for being bad kids. But then you also have to stretch that out and say, well, Hitler wasn't really responsible for the Holocaust. He wasn't really a bad guy. He didn't really do anything wrong. And so, a lot of people aren't willing to kind of bite that button.
Yeah.
Bite
It
that
feels
bullet.
sticky to do so. Yeah.
It does, yeah.
And do you think some of that is just because we as humans don't like it, and so we live as if we're in either a libertarian free will environment or as compatibilists because we don't want to deal with the implications of what it would mean to be in a purely deterministic universe?
Yeah, I think so, because there is something uncomfortable about admitting that, like, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't really do anything wrong. It just seems to go against our ideas. And I mean, that could just be, our societies have been formed on the idea that we have this libertarian free will and we have moral responsibility. 100 years down the line, it might not seem so icky because everybody's just a determinist.
So it seems to me, though, like from a practical standpoint, like it seems like determinism is just dead on arrival because it doesn't let me do anything interesting with it. Like at that point, like I can't run society. I can't like do anything to improve my well-being. And these are things I would like to have, and everyone pretty much agrees we'd like to have. And so it seemed like it would, in some ways, be irrational to act as if determinism was true. Determinism meaning like not compatibilism. Act as if we truly had no free will. It seems like that would be irrational because it would lead to results that nobody wants. So why would we do that?
Yeah, that's it. That's why one of the arguments is that even if free will doesn't exist, it's probably better to have it as a useful fiction, in that if we all believe it, it makes things better and it makes society more manageable. There's the idea that if there is no free will, then nobody's responsible for their crimes, and that means we can't, like, bring anybody to justice. If somebody's done something wrong. But Robert Sapolsky argues something like, well, even in a deterministic universe, you can still have good reason to pull them out of society. Kind of like a damaged car. If a car is damaged, it's not the car's fault. The car isn't bad. The car isn't evil. But you still have to take it out of service because it's dangerous. And that's how we can look at reasons for pulling bad criminals out of society and, locking them up.
Plus, it would also lead to the fact that if I'm a determined being, but I see somebody else do something and get punished for it, then that may make it me less likely to do that thing or less determined to do something.
Yeah, and that's it.
It seems like the determinism would deal a blow to retributive justice, where like I'm doing justice for the purpose of punishing this person. But if you don't believe in retributive justice, if the goal of justice is to rehabilitate the person and improve everyone's well-being, then that seems to be true regardless of whether determinism is true. Who cares? Like it doesn't matter.
It also seems to be more applicable under something like determinism, because libertarian free will, it can go either way. The person must want to change. Whereas with determinism, you can change the person as long as, the psychology is understood and the rehabilitation plan is better.
So up till now, we haven't explicitly said it, but it's been kind of implied, at least, that libertarian free will is the domain of theists, and perhaps some atheists might live there too, but theists pretty solidly live there, particularly when like mainstream Christian theism. And determinism, that's for us godless heathens. Is there much argumentation around the idea that you might not have free will in a theistic universe? So I'm thinking, like, if you imagine that there's a perfect being, like the perfect being, the God of the Bible that creates all things and like designed each one of you and like all that sort of stuff. He basically made the universe, everything in it, knew everything that was going to happen from beginning to end, and knew the situations you were going to be in, so on. And so he had this this spread of universes he could have picked. And in universe A, Dave goes to school for philosophy, and universe B, Dave wins the lottery and retires, fat and happy. And so he chose A. And by choosing A, he has kind of preemptively chosen for you. And then, so it seems like in that case, would you really have free will? Hasn't the choice already been made?
That's an argument that I make against the idea of having free will in the universe, in a universe created by the kind of God that most Christians argue, because I don't think you would. And I mean, that I don't know that much about Calvinism, but it seems to be slightly compatible with the Calvinistic idea that everybody's already fated to perform certain actions and they're already fated to end up in heaven or hell or what have you. And I think it's because they take the logical conclusion from, if God created the universe and God had infinite choices and chose this one. So I don't think that there would be free will. And there is a lot of arguments about trying to marry God's foreknowledge with the idea of free will, but none of it ever seems to rescue it as far as I'm concerned. Like, just because God knew the choice you were going to make when he created the universe doesn't mean that God made the choice for you or you don't have free will. And that just seems incoherent to me.
Yeah, I agree. And on the Calvinist thing, it seems like you almost have to respect them for just like straight up just accepting the conclusion. Whereas if you tell someone with perhaps, more empathy, like, hey, if you believe this set of things, it means that God created people for the express purpose of torturing them. And they're like, oh, wow, that's bad. We can't believe that. And the Calvinist is like, yes.
They're like, yeah. But as long as I'm not the one going to hell, I don't care what God chose for you,
Right. Which doesn't seem great to me. And so, right. And so it seems like that would at least make it so that in a theistic universe, you can't have the theistic universe where God has divine foreknowledge and is choosing for you. You couldn't have a just system that involved like eternal conscious torment, even for any other reason. Like some people might argue for it because you chose, but if God in some meaningful sense chose for you, and so you never had any way out of it, then it seems like God would be unjust to punish you for something he essentially chose for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I see it anyway. And one of the ways that some theists try to rescue this is that God, when they say that God knows all things, it's not that God knows the future. It's just that he knows everything that it's possible to know at this moment and up to this point. He doesn't know your future choices, only all the choices that you have made and could possibly make, but doesn't actually know which one you're going to make.
So, as I've always said, it seems like that this kind of free will and a lot of the problem of evil things are avoided if you just jettison one of your premises. The problem is that you've got a being with perfect omniscience, divine foreknowledge, and everything, omnipotent, perfectly benevolent. If you get rid of any of those, then the whole problem goes away. Maybe he doesn't know the future, in which case, okay, he's doing the best he can, but sometimes he messes up. Okay, he's not omnipotent. Hey, he wants to do it, but he can't always. Or maybe God's just kind of a dick. And
I usually go for the latter option.
I would say that most Christians, though, live their life and practice their Christianity as if God doesn't have perfect foreknowledge. If you look at intercessory prayer requests, many examples through the Christian and Hebrew scriptures specifically talk about God removing people's free wills at some points. So it seems like a lot of times in practice they don't live that way, even if they would argue that they do. So
yeah, I don't think it's sort of like atheists. I don't think a lot of Christians really think through the ideas that they have. They're just happily building on top of other ideas and responding to situations.
How dare you, Dave? Every atheist is a perfectly rational person. They wouldn't be an atheist otherwise. Being an atheist means you're both rational and intelligent and right about everything.
Perfectly rational in the same way that God has perfect foreknowledge that we just discussed.
Or we're all just dicks. So.
Yeah. I'm in that category,
Sure. So to quickly recap what we've talked about so far, libertarian free will is the free will everyone always thought you had, right? You are back here somewhere, controlling your body like a flesh golem and doing, whatever it is you want to do. Determinism is the universe is rigid. You can perfectly predict for the future from the past. And so you don't choose anything. Compatibilism is B, but also free will's fine. And that at least A and C compatibilism and libertarian free will are consistent with ideas of justice and personal responsibility and all that sort of stuff. So now that we've solved this problem in, I don't know how long we are to this point, 30 minutes or so, what sort of common objections, common mistakes, pitfalls that people make when they're talking about this topic?
There's a couple that I see atheists make, and one of them is the idea that libertarian free will can't exist because we don't have a choice about where we're born, the kind of futures we can have, or we can't choose to grow wings and fly or have forearms or choose to stop gravity. But there is no form of libertarian free will that argues that kind of maximum liberty. Or maximal liberty, is the word I think Plantinga uses. It's just the idea that when presented with choices, there is something that we're in charge of that allows us to pick from those choices. We're not determined. And that's another kind of mistake that many atheists make, in that they think determinism, the universe can only be determined because we're presented with 4 choices. And that determines which choices are available to us, and therefore that means the universe is determined. But again, that's not what determinism argues. It argues that when presented with those 4 choices, our psychology will make the choice for us. If it's not our psychology making the choice, then it's not determinism.
So basically, they're doing a poor job of understanding the other side.
Yeah.
Gasp.
Yeah. And I think it's because a lot of people, they just want to kind of get the word. It's like, it's not winning the argument. It's, well, if I can figure out a way to make it only this word that's useful, then I win the argument. If that makes any sense.
It's interesting, because if the world were truly that way, or you felt the world was truly that way, then there's no point in arguing with anybody about any topic whatsoever and trying to change minds, because it's not going to happen, right? So,
or if it did, it happened because of some fluctuation at the Big Bang, right, not because of anything you did.
Yeah, exactly.
The pachinko ball went the right way.
Yeah, exactly. It seems okay. So people argue about free will a lot, right? It's a very common source of conflict, but it seems to me that regardless of where you fall, like, I'm almost like, just tell me which one I've got and like get back to me when you've got an answer. Like I don't feel like if I learn tomorrow, it's like, hey, you for sure don't have free will. Be like, cool. Like, I don't think it would impact my life in any way, right? Or likewise, they're like, hey, you've got libertarian free will. That might have some implications, like maybe I have a soul or whatever, but like just the free will part on its own, it's like, cool. Like, I don't think it would actually impact my life, you know? Do you agree? Do you think it has broader implications?
It does. If determinism is true, and it is hard determinism, then that has certain implications when it comes to justice and morality. And those would need to be worked out. But for the average person, I don't think it would make that much difference, because they would still just go on living their lives feeling as if they're making choices and feeling as if they're responsible for those choices. Feeling like they deserve praise when they do something right, feeling like the people that they don't like and do something wrong deserve to be told off or removed from society. I don't think it would make that much difference in the greater scheme of things. It's a nice, useful fiction that everybody lives by.
And do you can share this if you want to or not, but are you a compatibilist for the most part? Is that where you find yourself?
Yeah. When it comes to philosophy, I generally go with what seems to help me make sense of the world. Mm-hmm. And compatibilism helps me make sense of the world more than determinism does, and way more than libertarian free will does. So I'm a compatibilist in the dead sense.
Yeah, I concur. It seems to me that it's kind of like talking about a useful fiction. It's kind of like how relativity is the way the world actually works, or at least that's our best picture of it, right? But you can go through your life, your entire life, assuming you live in a Newtonian universe, and you'll be just fine. Like, it's not. Is it true? No. But does it matter for your most interactions? No, it doesn't really matter. No. So, yeah. So, likewise, you might live in a deterministic universe. That might mean you don't have libertarian free will. Does it matter, really? No, you can still go get a hot dog and you'll be fine.
Yeah, you can still enjoy the taste of your food. You can have a laugh, and the world will carry on going, whatever it is. So,
at the end, the conclusion is none of this mattered, and you could feel free to live your life however you're going to live it before.
There is one thing I'd like to. Yes, I'd like to point out one thing though. Everybody who watched to this point is determined to hit the subscribe button and like it. That was predetermined from the start.
You have no choice.
You have no choice.
Now, most of you were not predetermined to do this, but some subset of you were predetermined to have desires such that you would like to see episodes like this a week before all of the unwashed masses who are watching it on YouTube. And if that's the case, you can go to our Patreon for as little as $5 a month, which really helps us out. It pays for all the StreamYard subscriptions and the art generators and all the other stuff we do to keep the lights on. It pays for all that so that our wives won't yell at us for having this hobby. So if you'd like to fund that and also fund neat new bow ties, you can go to patreon.com. But if you don't feel like doing that, just liking, commenting, subscribing at all really helps the channel.
And seriously, go check out Trolley Dave's content. Subscribe to that. Some really great stuff, and I've learned a lot.
You'll be a better skeptic if you do. I have had very fruitful conversations with Dave and Joe and others that hang out with him, and I've been led to change my mind on several topics. In fact, it's gotten to the point where if I see Dave, like on Twitter or something, say a position that I disagree with, I'm like, oh no, like, am I about to find out that I'm wrong?
Well, I did have a free will discussion on, Cheshire Vic?
No.
On Cheshire Vic's channel, we had a discussion last year, I think it was.
I thought you said Cheshire Pig. Yes, I've heard Cheshire Vic. Okay.
Yeah, no, Cheshire Vic. We had a discussion on her channel about free will with Bearded Heretic and Philip, another person who used to be on Answers and Reason. And Bearded Heretic went in very much in the camp of there is free will and got very angry at me near the end and suddenly changed his mind to being a determinist. And I got very upset when he found out I wasn't even a determinist.
Psych!
Yeah. And it was using Laplace's demon to convince him that there was determinism.
Well, hopefully you've been convinced, or at least you've learned something. Please do check out Trolley Dave's channel. But until next time, remember, you've always got reason to doubt.
Peace out.